Welcome to the Veterans Who Build show. Today's guest, we have a US Navy Seabee who continued his civilian professional career managing construction, where he founded a construction tech company where he is currently the CEO. He has amazing stories throughout life, military career, professional career, education, and even personal life, climbing Mount Denali in Alaska. I'm very excited for y'all to hear his story and his advice throughout life. A quick shout out to our subscribers. Thank you. Our listeners, thank you. A reminder to please subscribe to our channels. Please leave a comment, like, a review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. It really helps us grow our channels, grow our reach. A quick shout out to our sponsor, Jet.Build. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Zach Scheel. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Zach, it is awesome to have you, man. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Adam.
Definitely. So where are you calling in from?
From San Francisco Bay Area.
Awesome. And, I understand that you just went through a move, so I just want to give a shout out to you joining the show, even though you just moved. I really appreciate that, man. Thank you.
I was up late on Sunday making sure I had a bookshelf in the background to make it a little more interesting for the podcast.
Nailed it. We got the bookshelf, we got the plug for the company, and we are ready to go, man.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So formal introduction to Zach. Zach Scheel is a U.S. Navy veteran with 5 years of active duty service with the Seabees. Zach deployed to Northeast Africa during the Arab Spring in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. Zach has a decade of experience in the construction industry between his service in the Seabees and Bechtel Corporation. Zach managed construction on 3 different continents before co-founding Rumbix in 2014. Zach loves spending time outdoors, hiking, skiing, rucking, biking, all things outdoors, hobbies, activities, and sports. Zach, I'm very aligned with you on that outdoor activity thing. And, if I'm not mistaken, San Francisco is an amazing place to access nature.
Yeah. It's I got the ocean half-hour one way. I got Lake Tahoe 3 hours the other way. Wine country 45 minutes north. So it's not a bad place to live.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Love to hear that. All right, awesome. So as you know, and as our listeners know, we like to start off in chronological order. Let's hear about where you grew up and what led you in childhood to serving.
Yeah, so I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, kind of the smack dab in the Midwest, not too far from you in St. Louis today.
Yeah.
I grew up in a family. My dad was a Vietnam veteran, and 3 of my 4 grandparents served in the military in World War II. So I was always aware of the military. But I remember I broke my arm and had a pin put in high school. And I remember getting asked by the doctor my sophomore year of high school if I was planning on going into the military because so they could remove the pin, just one less waiver that I'd have to get. And I told the doctor, I was like, this is the first time I've been asked that question, so I don't think so. At that time, and I think even kind of moving forward, were it not for September 11th, I probably would never have joined the military. So I was a senior in high school on September 11th, that when that attack happened, kind of a flip switch was flipped inside me. I kind of heard the call to serve, went into a recruiting station, and walked out with an ROTC application that I submitted about a month later. And in December of 2001, I had a ROTC scholarship and was kind of on my way into the Navy.
Oh, yeah. So growing up with, that many family members who had served, were you like actively influenced? Were they talking about their service to you, or you just knew that they did?
Yeah, it's more the latter. So, of
Hmm.
my three grandparents, my grandfather on my dad's side, I never met. He passed before I was born. My grandmother was a nurse in World War II. Then my grandfather on my mom's side was a pilot, but never spoke with any of them about military service. By the time I actually decided to join, they'd all passed away. But my dad was a Vietnam era vet, so he was drafted. He had a low draft number. It was definitely not volunteer service, and I think he enjoyed probably the wrong word, but he had his military experience and didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't good or bad. There was a lot of hardship.
Hmm.
Vietnam was an ugly war, and it was just something that he never spoke with me or my two brothers with, and so. Um, my decision to join the military was due in part to something he said, which is if you want to go to school out of state, you got to get a scholarship. And so after September 11th happened, I was able to, kind of align getting a scholarship with military service. And, that was kind of the opportunity for me to both serve and began kind of my own journey, leaving the great state of Ohio. And, been a fun run for the last 22 years since then.
Nice, man. Yeah. By the way, I heard you say something that is pretty incredible. You said your grandmother was a pilot in the military.
Well, grandmother on my dad's side was a nurse. Grandfather was a
Grandfather.
pilot, Air Force on my mom's side. Yeah, I don't think there were any World War II female pilots that I'm aware
R-
of.
Right, right. Yeah. So I misheard, and that's why I wanted to verify because that would have been pretty incredible. Anyways, yeah. Nonetheless, I mean, to be a pilot World War II era, that's incredible. Also, yeah, cool. So, I mean, what were there any particulars in childhood out of curiosity that you saw yourself leaning toward military, or was it really that moment plus just having that family background that pushed you over the line?
I distinctly remember being very patriotic growing up.
Hmm.
Played soccer competitively, for about 20 years. But in high school, remember before every soccer game, just kind of a welling up of emotion listening to the national anthem. And
Hmm.
Cincinnati, Ohio, in the Midwest, it's not an uncommon place to join the military
Right.
from. Actually, unfortunately, the first person back in the early Iraq War who was beheaded by Al Qaeda and kind of posted on YouTube was from Glen Estee, the town kind of right next to
Mhm.
mine. So I grew up around yellow ribbons. I grew up around a population where military service was not as uncommon
Mhm.
as it is on the coast. And so, um, I was always around it, but again, kind of, I think absent September 11th, I would not have had that really forcing function. That kind of led me to, to raise my right hand and take the oath of being an officer and go on to 5 years of military service.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always intrigued by uh, environment, like right, just what was around you during like childhood period, and if that had an impact or influence. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. All right, so walk us through that enlistment process.
Yeah, and so my dad did always take us to like he was a CH-53 pilot in the Marine Corps, and so growing up, we went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, saw the
Mm.
SR-71 Blackbirds. We were on spring breaks in Destin, Florida, and he would take us to Pensacola. So loved taking us to aircraft museums growing up, and so you know. Wasn't explicitly like join the military, but it was very obvious he was fond of
Yeah.
flying, and the military was kind of what led him to that. And yeah, like I said, I talked to a recruiter right after September 11th. We had a discussion, and he said, "Hey, as much as I want to give you the enlisted paperwork and kind of send you on to boot camp, given what you told me about yourself, I think the officer path is the right one. There's kind of two options: the Naval Academy or any of the service academies, or ROTC." I said, "I kind of still want to go to college and have that experience, and so let's talk about ROTC." I filled out a Navy ROTC application and an Air Force application. I got a half ride from the Air Force and a full ride from the Navy. So go Navy.
Yeah, easy decision, right? Wait,
Yep,
was this like senior year of high school? Is that when that was happening?
it was. Yeah. So I
Okay, yeah.
got notified in like December of 2001. that I had a full ride to Duke University. I just had to get in.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome, man. So walk us through that, that process, what that was like, starting undergrad in the ROTC program.
Yeah, so went through Duke University, Navy ROTC program. And actually, the first year is free. So I had an opportunity at the end of the first year to kind of make that decision, kind of redouble down, which I did on military service. And, I took to the military, very well. I think it was great. I enjoyed wearing my uniform on Tuesdays and Thursdays on campus. Was just, very proud of,
Mm-hmm.
wearing a military uniform on a college campus. And for the most part, I was a normal college student. But then instead of going to work in banking or consulting for summer internship, I spent a month in Norfolk. Was with the Marine Corps for a week. Was with the Aviation Squadron for a week, flying T-34s. Spent a week on a submarine out on sea off the Atlantic, and a week on a surface ship. And didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but that was when I was like, hey. I'll go ahead and sign up for the next 3 years of college, and then the 4 years that I owe beyond that. And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a, this is the second time I'm really hearing in depth of the ROTC program. I remember I was in undergrad in Boston. I remember seeing ROTC, but didn't really know so much about it. And man, it just sounds like such an awesome, flow of integration.
Yeah, it really, for me, I was able to have a very classic, collegiate experience. But also, when we got commissioned, we were the exact same as anyone coming out of the Naval Academy, except we didn't have a big brass ring that we knock on the table all the time. So for me, it was a perfect program that allowed me to go get a tier 1 education, and then also have that covered by the U.S. government, and then go on to serve the country afterwards.
Totally. So what was like the typical, I don't know what interval makes sense to ask, like weekly or monthly commitment?
Yeah. So, I mean, during college, Tuesday, Thursday, 0600, you're up PTing. And so that was good, good discipline for me. You're up early, and then, you go to group PT, and then you're at class by 8, which is earlier than most of the other university classes start. And, depending on, the time of the year, you might have, a Navy birthday ball in the fall that is a big event. As part of the fundraisers for the Navy ROTC at Duke, we actually cleaned up the stadiums before or after football games and after basketball games, which kind of, wasn't the most fun, but you also got tickets to Duke basketball games. So, they're probably the worst tickets in Cameron. They were right up in the rafters, but I was able to go attend a lot of great basketball games, watch a lot of good basketball, hang out. And so it was definitely like a 20-hour-a-week job outside of school that, a lot of our classmates, didn't have, but, they paid for school.
Yeah, exactly. Paid for school, and also other classmates weren't going on submarines in the summer. So
yeah, exactly.
Makes sense, man.
To worry about summer internships and recruiting. Like I had my job that I was going to be doing. Just didn't know what specifically I was doing in the Navy or where I was going to be doing it, but was heading into the Navy.
So then at what point do you kind of create a track, or you don't until you finish undergrad?
So senior year, you have to service select, and so ROTC generates unrestricted line officers. So your options are surface warfare, submarine warfare, aviation, or Marine Corps, or you could try for special forces. So I actually had selected my senior year to go surface warfare, and had already gotten assigned to the USS Cleveland out of San Diego, and then an opportunity came up where they basically sent out an email and said, hey, we're looking for folks that qualify to directly ascend into the Civil Engineer Corps. So the Civil Engineer Corps is what's called restricted line. So it's kind of like JAG Corps, Med Corps, Civil Engineer Corps, there's a Dental Corps, areas where you have to have a specialty to get in. And for the most part, the way to get into the Civil Engineer Corps is you lateral transfer after 2 to 4 years of service in an unrestricted line, or you go through what's called officer candidate school, where this is somebody that just got a civil engineering degree and wanted to join the Navy afterwards could go through the OCS program. So there was a very short window in 2006 where the Civil Engineer Corps was losing junior officers at an unprecedented rate. The economy was booming. Contractors were hiring Civil Engineer Corps officers and giving them great salaries at 4 years to go jump ship over to the civilian side. So they actually opened up a small window for me to do a direct accession into the Civil Engineer Corps. So I got accepted. I got redesignated to a Civil Engineer Corps officer and had to drive to Norfolk 2 days before graduation to get different shoulder pads that had the oak leaves on them instead of the anchors for the Civil Engineer Corps.
Wow, yeah, interesting. What were you studying undergrad?
So I studied mechanical engineering, and so
Okay.
Civil Engineer Corps will take electrical, civil, environmental, and mechanical engineers.
Yeah, okay, awesome. How did you even know to study or want to study mechanical?
I was always very, very drawn to science and math.
Hmm.
Like my SATs, I had perfect 800 on the math side. The written and writing was not as high, but was always a tinkerer. Physics was
Hmm.
one of my favorite classes in high school, and so um, I started out in biomedical and electrical engineering. That was kind of what I went into at Duke. But really actually had a hard time understanding a lot of the professors and gravitated more into mechanical engineering. And yeah, I really loved that program. It was a great general engineering program that you can really kind of do anything that you want kind of after the fact with a basis of mechanical engineering as a fundamental degree.
Wow, that's awesome, man. I mean, so it sounds like the opportunity to get into civil, right, with the Navy, really worked out. That was with the Navy, right? Still,
With the Navy, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So,
awesome.
you know, changed out my shoulder boards. I got commissioned. I was a civil engineer corps officer, and went to Seacoast Civil Engineer Corps Basic Officer School in Port Hueneme, California, and that's really where they teach you how to be a construction manager. And
Hmm.
so then my first 3 years in the Navy was essentially a construction project manager, where I was responsible for oversight of all aspects of the project. But I ended up during that time getting my professional engineer license in mechanical engineering. So it was a great way to actually get an accreditation that's recognized out in the civilian world very broadly with a professional engineer license through working as a mechanical engineer managing construction projects for the Navy.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, where was that degree done? That was like a Navy provided degree.
So it's more like passing the bar. It's kind of like
Hmm.
a
Got it.
professional accreditation.
Hmm.
And so the requirements to sit for the PE exam is you have to study underneath or work underneath a professional engineer.
Hmm.
Um, Washington State, where I was, required 4 years of work under a PE, and California only required two. So I ended up flying to California to take it and pass the test. But
Nice.
the Navy gave me the opportunity to work under a professional engineer, hit the minimum requirements. I kind of self studied for the test on nights and weekends, which it's about 300 hours. They
Yeah.
recommend kind of putting in. I think I got to like 250 before I was done looking at books and. Yeah, took the exam and was able to pass it. But it was something that if you were going to stay in a career within the Civil Engineer Corps, the Seabees, to select for '05 or '06, they require you to have a PE. Basically, that's one of the big things that will prevent you from promoting, to commander or captain. And so the programs were there to kind of get started on early, and I took advantage of that right out of the gate.
Yeah, congrats, man. That's awesome. So tell us a bit of projects that you were managing during that time frame.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up around construction. So after my dad got out of the Marine Corps, he ended up selling construction equipment all throughout the Midwest. So it's
Mhm.
kind of one of those things where despite my best efforts, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Yeah.
I never thought about construction. That was never kind of the plan professionally. Um, but the Seabees seemed like a much better option than surface warfare and going out to sea. And so I was excited to kind of go down that path and turns out I loved it. I think just the construction industry is just salt of the earth people, and every day you're building something, and you
Mhm.
can at the end of the day walk away, and it's very easy to see the impact that your work product
Yeah.
had on the built environment, on the built world. And so I also got very lucky with my first duty station. The billet was one that had not been filled for several years, but they had a large $55 million barracks that was being built at Naval Station Everett. And so they reopened the billet, and I was put there to manage that job. So the project was MILCON P155 BEQ Home Port Ashore. Very, very unsexy name for a construction project, but it was a part of a new initiative to take sailors and move them off of the ship to give them permanent land-based barracks. So Naval Station Everett is primarily the carrier strike group for the USS Abraham Lincoln. So the Lincoln, I think 2 destroyers and 3 frigates are home ported there, or at least were where I was there. But unfortunately, when the Abe Lincoln was back at home port, most of the 18 to 20-year-olds slept on the ship. And that's just not a good quality of life. That's
Right.
fine to do when you're out at sea, you're doing workups. So this barracks was really designed to provide 504 beds for sailors, young sailors to have a house in a little apartment to live on at the naval station. So first and foremost, it was an awesome project because of the mission. The purpose was really to take these sailors that had just been out to sea and give them a barracks that they can live in.
Mhm.
The kind of second thing about that project that made it really awesome was, unfortunately, during the course of construction, a local sailor in the Pacific Northwest got killed in Afghanistan. He was a SARC corpsman, so one of the special amphibious reconnaissance corpsmen from the Navy that serves in the Marine Corps. I got the opportunity to read all his combinations, like an absolute hero. He
Mhm.
died in a firefight where there was 18 U.S. troops against about 160 Taliban. At the end of the firefight, the Taliban surrendered. There was only 40 of them left alive, and
Wow.
unfortunately, Luke Milam was the only casualty on the U.S. side. He took a round from a recoilless rifle as he was moving from fighting position to fighting position, basically patching up the Marines that were, laying down the firepower and holding the lines against the enemy. And so um, the
Wow.
local commanding officer at Naval Station Everett met Luke's family, as did I, at his funeral at Naval Station Everett. And then we actually petitioned for the Chief of Naval Operations to name the new barracks after Luke Milam. So
Amazing.
Charles Luke Milam Bachelor Housing, was the new name. And it was just a super special project to be involved with.
Mm.
Luke joined the Navy because he was actually in high school when the Columbine attacks happened. He happened to be at home feeding his dog that was sick and letting it out. And when he came back to school, several of his classmates and friends had been killed, and that was what led him to join the Navy. Um, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts. I described the kind of circumstances of his death, but the guy is an absolute hero, and so
Mhm.
I was able to work with his family to actually make the entire lobby of the barracks a living monument and a tribute to Luke with a lot of his personal belongings and bits and pieces of his childhood and military service, kind of all displayed all throughout the barracks. And so that was kind of the special second thing that made that just a super special project. And then the third
Amazing.
is we went on to have it be the first LEED Gold certified building in the Navy. And so LEED is leadership in energy and environmental design. I had no idea what LEED was when we started the project. I saw it as a contract requirement, so I started to get smart on it. And because we were building the Pacific Northwest, like very progressive builders that were very aligned with green sustainable building, and we started checking off the boxes of the LEED certification, and the certification levels just go certified, silver, gold, and platinum, and so we were able to get all the way up to LEED Gold and have that be the first LEED Gold certified building. And so my first 3 years was spent managing that one project and a bunch of really small other projects, but
Yeah.
that was just a super rewarding project for all the reasons I just listed.
Yeah, man, that's an incredible story. I'm glad that you were able to share. Luke, you said, right?
Luke, yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that you were able to share Luke's story. Amazing to hear it. Absolute hero. Really, really neat that you were able to build those barracks, make a memorial for him and for, what he was able to accomplish in his efforts. So, yeah, thank you for sharing, man. That's amazing. So, what happens? What happens next then? So you finish these projects. When was that PE certification?
Trying to remember when I got the PE certification. Probably around 2009, 2010. Um, 2009, I was getting ready to deploy to Iraq.
Okay.
So they had these roles called individual augmentees, where basically the Navy was backfilling in high demand roles that they needed folks to
Hmm.
fill. Oftentimes were Army roles. And so um, I volunteered, raised my hand, wanted to make sure I got some combat experience, headed to Iraq. I was heading to Al Assad Air Base. I was going to be out there basically working with, a lot of the Halliburtons and the contractors in country, building back infrastructure, in Iraq.
Hmm.
And so basically it was like halfway moved out of my apartment, was playing in a big soccer tournament and blew out 5 ligaments in my knee 2 weeks before deploying. So ACL, MCL, PCL, medial, lateral meniscus, literally, and like sitting on the side of the soccer field, just like I've never felt more like the rug being pulled out from underneath me.
Wow.
Didn't know what was wrong with my knee yet, but I was like, I've never heard it make that noise before. It was kind of the pop you hear about.
Hmm.
And so yeah, it was tough. That was definitely, at that point, I'd done some cool things in terms of construction project management, but I also wanted to go to business school. And so put in my papers to get out of the Navy, had surgery on my left knee. While I was recovering, had surgery on my left shoulder as well. I'd had numerous dislocations from both, active duty and non-active duty, kind of recreational activities and sports and, flag football and soccer and everything else. And so I was able to get fixed up, served as the public works officer, assistant public works officer at the Navy base, which was
Hmm.
a new job. So instead of building new stuff, I was basically operating the base, working with the commander who was the public works officer and, more responsible for, the steam plant that powered the Lincoln when it was at home port, all the ongoing base operations and maintenance. So it was good opportunity to get exposure to different aspects, of the military during that
Hmm.
year. And then, like I said, I had already put in my papers to get out of the Navy and was planning to head to business school and submit applications. And an opportunity came up for another individual augmentee assignment, and this time it was Djibouti, Africa. And so I went to my commanding officer and said, "Hey, I know I already have my papers in to get out of the Navy, but I'm interested." And so some phone calls were made. My papers were pulled, and the next thing I know,
Hmm.
I had orders to Djibouti, Africa, and I was
Nice.
heading there. And very ironically, landed in Djibouti on September 11th, 2010.
Wow.
So kind of
Hmm.
9 years after, kind of like the day that really shifted me into wanting to go into military service.
Right.
Landed in a war zone. Landed. Get out of the plane. I was, it was very real. I
Yeah.
was, in sub-Saharan Africa, and and so that tour, the job I was filling over there was basically helping turn what once was a forward operating base into a much more permanent base. So I
Mm.
was in charge of a water purification plant, 200,000 gallon water storage tanks, about 10 miles of water distribution,
Wow.
275,000 gallon per day wastewater treatment plant, 6 megawatts of new power generation, cat diesel generator units, seven 50,000 gallon fuel storage tanks to power the generators, and all of that base infrastructure and utility system was to support a massive new special operations command and control element, a new barracks, and really kind of plussing up what is the only permanent U.S. military base in the continent of Africa.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. But before we continue in that into that deployment, going back to the time frame of injury until deployment, I mean, what was that just like generally speaking, what was that time frame in terms of just the length of it, and then also like what were you doing to recover?
Yeah, so it was summer 2009 that I blew out my knee. So I think I had surgery in October on the knee. And so now the timeline, kind of, so I had taken the GMAT before I blew out my knee, and the score was not high enough to get into, kind of call them tier one business schools. So blew out my knee, and then basically, was able to be in this new billet as the assistant
Hmm.
public works officer, studied up to retake the GMAT, and then it was spring of 2010 that I took my professional engineer exam. So during that time, while I was recovering from two surgeries, just basically
Yeah.
a lot of time at the University of Washington library there in Seattle. Studied up, retook the GMAT, studied for my PE exam. I think I got my letter that I passed the PE in probably July of 2010, and then September I deployed to Djibouti. So, um, what started out as actually like a pretty low point in terms of I had always been you know top 1% in terms of physical fitness tests and everything with the military, and had never had any major injuries. I'd
Hmm.
had a few things here and there. Was pretty low point, after the knee getting
Sure.
blown out and the shoulder surgery. But, I think it's just kind of one of those periods of adversity that you just got to kind of push through, and made the most of it by, studying up. I got a much higher GMAT score. I was able to take the PE exam and pass it. And so made the most of what could have otherwise been a pretty bad, year in my life. And certainly one where I wasn't, um, I was feeling pretty down on myself, and just a lot of kind of self pity at times.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean that uh like not to don't diminish being able to accomplish that when one literal physical injury, right? I mean that just makes a lot of things complicated, and then two, like the mental impact that creates against the ongoing physical injury, not easy to overcome, and then especially not easy to then excel like you did. So take advantage of what you could in that situation, aka studying in this circumstance. So really awesome that you were able to do that. So congrats on accomplishing all of that during that time, man. Not easy. um
No, I remember feeling sorry for myself, and
yeah,
like it was just kind of this bad headspace that I was in, and
sure.
I can't remember what got me out of it, but it was just like I can't I don't want to be in this
Yeah.
headspace of feeling sorry for myself, and um, feeling like I'm not in control of my life, and that
Hmm.
all these things just happened to me that kind of threw me off a trajectory that I thought I was on, and said, hey, I can have more control, but you gotta buck up and stop feeling sorry for yourself. And so
Exactly,
that
man. Yeah.
was what I think I was able to really kind of um, create the motivation I needed to focus on the things I wanted to do to unlock where I wanted to go next. And then that low place was because I thought I was going to get out of the military, having really only served in Seattle, for
Hmm.
4 years, and a role that a civilian could have done no problem. It didn't really feel like I had done military service, and I was not wanting to kind of leave without having gone on a deployment, gone overseas, and so serendipitously, like the opportunity arose, I was able to still do that, and so Djibouti very much was a great end cap on my
Mm.
military, 5 years of military experience, and I was able to leave, feeling very proud of my service, and then in hindsight, the work that I had done on the PE exam and the GMAT, kind of paved the way for the next chapters after the military.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So continuing on where I put stopped and went back. Was there like a specific workup before you deployed, or it was kind of just like you're deploying and figure it out there?
Yeah, so these individual augmentee assignments are you're getting dropped in as an individual, and so
Mm.
you're not deploying with a unit, you're not deploying with a battalion or anything like that, and so um, literally there's one flight once a week from Paris, France to Djibouti, because there was the French Foreign Legionnaires were there, and so almost the entire flight is French foreign military, U.S. contractors, and U.S. military, and got dropped in, and it was pretty awesome opportunity. That the base supported about 3,000 special operators that were
Mm.
downrange almost all the time. From West Africa and Boko Haram to Al Shabaab and Somalia, and everywhere in between. And so, a hugely important base in terms of mission. Stuff that's going on today with the Houthi rebels, like that. That's all being coordinated from
Mhm.
the JOC at Djibouti, the Joint Operations Center. Back in 2010, 2011, all focus in the news and media was on Iraq and Afghanistan primarily. And so, I get over to Djibouti and it was just like, oh man, there's a lot going on in Africa. And this was
Yeah.
2 months before the Arab Spring started. Like that started in December, right after I got there. But a very, very active, like drones, a lot of counter piracy operations were all kind of spearheaded and coordinated through there. 10% of the world's commerce heads east out of the Suez Canal and goes through the Bab el-Mandeb Straits right into pirate water. Like that's the choke point that the Houthis are hitting all the ships at right now.
Mhm.
And so like our base was 50 miles to Yemen and about 15 to the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. And so like we definitely, we're responsible for that waterway. And so, yeah, so I get to the base, and just by like sheer happenstance, my boss, the base public works officer, was the public works officer at Naval Station Everett and was my first boss in the Navy. So it was very, very fun to see Commander Donnelly again, a friendly face. But I wasn't this like brand new ensign. As a, 4-year lieutenant. So, I knew enough to be dangerous. And basically I had a 2-week turnover with the lieutenant commander who was managing all the projects up until I showed up. And I got to take over those projects from her. And then ultimately, after I left about 8 months later, handed them over to the next individual augmentee that filled my billet. But it was a cool opportunity because there was only about 30 officers that ran the entire base that supported these 3,000 special operators. And
Wow.
so, you really kind of, kind of earlier talking about what's great about construction is like you knew the impact you were having, right? Like for better or worse, I was we had a lot of challenges with putting new cat diesel gensets and integrating with the existing base electrical transmission and distribution, which was not done up to like US standards originally. And so the long and short of that was a lot of power outages. And in the summer in Djibouti, the overnight lows are like 95. And so
Wow.
I was, one of the least popular guys on base anytime I come out and all the air conditioners shut off. So, it was good. I didn't have to get a phone call from anyone to be like, hey, I need you up here. And like as soon as the power went off in the middle of the night, I just throw my gear on, head over to our containerized work unit and, try to, meet up with a contractor, figure out what's going on. I knew I'd be getting a phone call from the base commanding officer, Captain Benaji, about, time to get the AC back online. So it was, it was fun. It was, we weren't taking, shrapnel or anything like that. There wasn't mortars getting launched at us. We were in a hostile part of the world, but it was just a really fun mission and awesome to be part of. Building more or less the entire utility infrastructure for that base that now is probably 3 or 4 times the size of what it was when I was there about 14 years ago now.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, man. I'm gonna triple down on something you said twice now, which is in your capacity and what you were doing in the military and in the AC industry and the built environment in general. I mean, I feel like it's pretty rare in the sense where you can be doing something and you have tangible outcome of the effort you put in, which is I think pretty unique to other industries. So yeah, just highlighting how awesome that is, especially coming from military and continuing in that path in your profession and civilian life. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that because I totally agree, and it's an awesome element to have for in terms of what you're doing day to day in life.
Yeah, fast forward, I landed up at business school at Stanford, and I can point to all the facilities I've built around the world, and a lot of my classmates who are extremely impressive and some of the most smart, driven, capable people, I've ever met. It's like, well, here's all the PowerPoint decks I made. Here's all the
Right.
financial models I built. And I live in that world now, so I appreciate all
Right.
that stuff. But there's something very, very rewarding about being able to take a step back and
Yeah.
say, I built that. That's going to have a 50 to 70 year, lifetime in that facility. And there's a lot of pride of craftsmanship,
Yeah.
regardless of your role on the project, be it, somebody swinging the hammer to the architect and engineer designing it, to the person managing the project. Everyone felt a ton of ownership, especially of that like barracks building. We had
Hmm.
a big ribbon cutting. Luke Milam's commanding officer from Camp Lejeune came out from North Carolina with his MARSOC special operations group, and I got to meet all of them. And yeah, it was just like every big construction project, you just kind of always have a connection to that facility for the
Yeah.
rest of its existence.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, man. You made your mark. That's really awesome. So what happened kind of toward the end of deployment? Like how did that wind down and you return?
Yeah, so I submitted all my business school applications from Djibouti, and so I got there in like September 11th. I think late September, early October. The applications were all due. Did my
Wow.
business school interviews, and so I got into business school, and ultimately ended up accepting a admissions offer to Stanford. But yeah, I was in Djibouti. I had a cell phone that very rarely worked because we worked in metal boxes and lived in metal boxes most of the time, and there was just not good cellular infrastructure. And I remember this day that I kept on coming in and out of the our CHU containerized work unit, and one of the engineering managers I worked with was like, "Hey, somebody called. They wouldn't leave a message. They said they'd call back." But the Stanford admissions officer makes it a point to call every student that's let in and personally let them know. And so, like, I was actually getting ready to submit my application to MIT when my phone rang, and I just happened to pick it up one night working at it was like 9 o'clock at night, just working after hours, and talked to Derek Bolton. I had to step outside. I was really close to the airfield. There was like planes going by. I was like, who is this? And like he said it for a second, and then it was like Stanford University Dean of Admissions. I was like, oh, hello. And so he let me know, I got an admission offer to Stanford, which was like my dream school. And, but yeah, it was pretty awesome. Went and found like the only other junior officer that was working. And I was like, hey, I think, let's hit Shafaro's, has some cigars. Like, this is a big deal for me. Let's go
Yeah, hell
smoke,
yeah.
smoke a cigar in the smoke pit and celebrate. And so, yeah, I think, me and one or two other guys had cigars that night. That was in, early December, I think. Yeah, early December that I got that. So I was just on cloud nine.
Yeah.
The rest of my time there, and that actually was like when the Arab Spring started, also, and so it was a very interesting time to be in that part of the world. You know, um, Things fired up in Tunisia, then began to spread through Egypt. I think Egypt fell in late January, the
Mhm.
dictator there, and then the Arab Spring definitely swept through Djibouti. There was a lot of civil unrest. The military base was the safest place to be by by a long shot.
Right.
We had all the
Hmm.
firepower, all the guns, and all the people that knew how to shoot them. So it was a very safe place to be. But as that sort of proliferation of data via social media and Twitter was bringing down, um, dictatorships all throughout, the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. Like, yeah, I was in the middle of that. So, you
Did,
know,
did you did you feel kind of your role pick up as externalities picked up?
so my role was mostly working on the base, and so but what I did see was all of those 3,000 special operators like were turning around and coming and going, and there was a lot of activity and there was a lot of action, and they'd occasionally need to tap into the engineers from the base around, hey, we're looking at getting civilians out of Egypt, and we need to have you guys lay eyes on a couple bridges that we don't know if they can carry trucks big enough to get kind of the human evac out of there for
Hmm.
civilians that we are trying to extract. And so, um, my day to day didn't change because
Mm.
I was in charge of all those construction projects, but the base exists to support that SOXY element with the Joint Special Operations Command, and those guys' missions changed
Right.
immediately, and so they were the ones out going and helping to get the civilians out of Tunisia and Libya and Egypt and Sudan and all those countries where shit was hitting the fan and wasn't clear that there was a path to a commercial airport, a flight out of the country, and so I was smack dab in the middle of all of that. We would have to stand watch, the command duty officer about once every 7 days, and so when you're standing watch, you're also working with the Joint Operations Center, and so they're kind of keeping you in the loop on a lot of different whatever ops are going on for the day. And so, it was interesting to be part of a lot of briefings and just kind of seeing, a map of the continent of Africa with about like 75 different pinpoints that are all some sort of little local activity that's going on and a little hot spot and what's going on there. And certainly when the Arab Spring started, like it went from like 40 pin drops to like 70, 80 pin drops all throughout
Right.
the country and different briefings on, hey, this is what's going on here. We're tracking this, good guys here, bad guys there. This is what we're going to do about it. And that was really kind of like what I needed to feel good about, my military
Hmm.
service and, wearing the uniform, being in a forward operating base, during a period of hostility. That was like I said, a great kind of bookend on, very, rewarding 5 years of service for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, what does the, I guess, literal wind down look like? You got the call. You got into business school. Uh, how does coming home, happen?
Yeah, yeah. So, fast forward to like March, April timeframe. I think it was April. My relief showed up. Went through a couple weeks of turnover with that individual, and I took one of those Saturday night flights back to Paris. I was able to go from
Mhm.
Paris to Seattle, and it was great. I knew I was getting out of the military at that point in time,
Mhm.
and so I got back. I think in like April. I was starting at Stanford in August, like late August, they started. And my last day of active duty was I think mid May. So basically, got back. I had about a month to kind of process out of the military, go on terminal leave. Then I went up to Alaska to go climb Denali.
Nice. Nice, man. Hell
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and so I got out. I summited on I think like June 7th or so
Hmm.
of 2011.
So
You
the knee's
know,
doing good. The knee's doing good.
he's doing good. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Stanford Docs redid all the Navy surgeries. He's
Oh
doing
man.
good now. We blew out the ACL. I knew it wasn't doing great, but it was good enough to get me up and down the mountain.
There you go.
But yeah, no, I had kind of a 4 month period, which is really the only kind of
Hmm.
gap I've had with like no job, nothing to do, and so I climbed Denali, went and traveled for a couple months, went back to Cincinnati, saw my family, eventually kind of wound up back in Seattle, where left my truck with a buddy and drove down to Palo Alto to Stanford's campus, and I got there in about August 2011 to start business school and did a dual degree in business and construction management.
That's awesome, man. Before we continue, I want to go back to this Denali ascent. What was that like? I mean, is it camping in the middle? Is it just one straight shot up? How's that work?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a big mountain expedition, and so I climbed Kilimanjaro
Hmm.
previously, and so I'd had some experience with being at 22,000 feet elevation. But Denali was a whole different beast because it's glaciated, so
Mm.
you've got crevasses and you got to do roped glacier travel, and so I got into that when I was in Seattle. Pacific Northwest is just one of the most
Right.
beautiful and amazing parts of the United States. And I got out there, a kid from Ohio. I was like, oh, look at all these mountains. I want to go climb them. And so had a guy that was a few years older that was really into mountaineering, kind of get me into it. And So yeah, Denali, you leave from Talkeetna, you take off on this little tiny plane with some skis on it, and it literally lands on a glacier,
Yeah.
and you unload the plane, and then the plane turns around, takes off, and it's like, bye. You know,
Yeah.
you're on your own. I hope you brought everything you need.
Figure it out.
And so I think it took us, I think we summited on day 15 or 16, and then we
Wow.
were down in about 36 hours. You got to acclimatize on the way up. We
Hmm.
got up to high camp, which was around 17,000 feet on day like 11. And then we were up there for 4 or 5 days before we got our weather window. And it was a 20-hour summit day. I mean, you leave at, 3 in the morning up the Denali head wall. I don't know what time we summited, probably like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and got back by around like midnight back to camp. So it was like a 20, 21 hour summit day. It was,
Wow. That
yeah, one of the most physically exerting days of my life.
sure, man. I mean, that's wow. That's unbelievable. Like, I had presumed that you need, and you might have had this, right? You're saying you got into mountaineering with a friend in the Seattle area. I mean, how much skill do you need to be able to do that?
You need a lot. I mean, you need to know what you're
Yeah.
doing, right? So
Right.
you need to know how to, if somebody goes into a crevasse, kind of how to anchor.
Right.
What you need to do. If you're in the crevasse, you need to know how to chill out, how to relax. And I've done a lot of like prep and training on mountain
Hmm.
gear up in the Seattle area. And
Hmm.
once you get up to Talkeetna, where I went with Alaska Mountaineering School, they make you do a skills course the first day just to make sure that you can prusik out of a crevasse if you need to, and make sure everyone's got the right gear and there's a minimum level of kind of competence for you to
Hmm.
do it. Because so it was I think it started out as 8 of us, but only 5 of it made it to the top. There was a couple of injuries. One older gentleman tore his ACL. I forget, and his wife went down with him, and there was one other injury. But I mean, it is uh, mountaineering is a difficult sport because it's just all suck. It's just
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
foot in
Yeah.
front of
Yeah.
the other, and it's just like it's a war of attrition with yourself of like how
Totally.
much can you put up with to get to the top of this mountain. And it's biting cold temperatures,
Yeah.
well below zero. Like the winds can be ripping at 80, 90 miles per hour, and how do you keep your wits about you? And but actually that season, by the time we got there, 7 people had already died on the mountain, and it was one of the most deadly seasons of climbing that they'd had, and it was like no
Wow.
joke. Like an entire Japanese team had gotten stuck on the other side of the Denali Pass, and basically froze to death. 2 other people had
Wow.
gotten blown off the mountain. We had to help with the evac rescue of a guy that had high altitude pulmonary edema when we were up there, that we found face down on the snow coming down from the summit with like blood next to his mouth. It was definitely having HAPE and haze, and we were able to help. The guides I was with were able to get the helo in. They just lower a stretcher. They call it a scream suit, and they're like, "That's the wildest helicopter ride that guy will ever remember." They kind of
Wow.
strap him to this thing. I forget the name of the helicopter, one of those ones with the giant, huge blades because the air is so thin up there. And yeah, they just take them and did med evac, flew them down to base camp, get them down to about 8,000 feet lower elevation. Work on that brain swelling going down, or they got a plane to get to the hospital. Never who knows what happened to that
Right.
man,
Right.
but it's not it's a deadly mountain if you don't know what
Yeah.
you're doing there.
Yeah, wow, that's unbelievable, man. Congrats on sending that and making it through that. That's I'm sure an amazing life experience.
It absolutely was.
Yeah, wow. Okay, cool. So we're in this like time frame where we like to touch on transition period, right? So finished the military. I obviously just talked about that climbing experience, and then we touched on about to have started your MBA. So what is that time frame like? And I mean, this answer could continue, right? Could carry on, of course, through your graduate degree and onwards. But just, I mean, I guess initially, what was that transition like? And really, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah. So It was a bit of an abrupt transition out of the
Hmm.
military. I think the Navy and the military in general does a better job now than they did, 14 years ago when I was getting out. But I got to business school. Definitely felt like a fish out of water.
Hmm.
I felt like I was having to study twice as much as everyone else, and still was just lost in class. We didn't have P&Ls at the military. It's like we just had L's. Congress approves a budget and we spend it. There was no top line revenue coming in. And so it was interesting. Yeah, the first year I felt really kind of behind the eight ball, and then I was just kind of like, imposter syndrome. Like, don't
Hmm.
tell anyone. I got in, by accident. Let's not be kind of found out. And then, the second year you do a lot more role playing and case studies, and that's really where I was able to see kind of a lot of the stuff I learned in the military is
Yeah.
very, very transferable. And in terms of
Hmm.
like small troop leadership, how to handle sticky situations, doing the right thing, having the difficult conversation. In the military, you're responsible for kind of all aspects of your sailors' lives. I had a sailor whose father committed suicide, and he wasn't living with his mom, and I had to help him get his father back from overseas and all kinds of
Hmm.
stuff that you kind of get pulled into just as nature of standard responsibilities as an officer. And so really during the second year of the business school, was able to see that actually I learned a lot, although I wasn't aware of it at the time,
Right.
about leadership and about um, what to do in difficult situations, that things that are felt natural to me that I would have thought would have felt natural to others, but I actually realized like, some
Totally.
classmates are like, oh, I don't like direct confrontation with people. I just build the financial models and I just make, the investing memos and, really kind of, help galvanize for me that I wanted to be an operator and I wanted to
Hmm.
be, um, in an operating role within a company versus a consultant, financial services that are more kind of on the sideline providing ancillary services. And so the second year was good for that. My summer internships, I worked with Bechtel Corporation on a couple of big global mega projects. And then the second summer I was working at the world's largest copper mine in northern Chile. That project was a $3.5 billion project.
Wow.
I was on the team that was responsible for cost controls, and the data that we needed was coming from 1,000 paper time cards, handwritten in Chilean Spanish, being turned in every day. It took 4 days for a 70-person clerical staff to translate that to English, put that into an access database that Bechtel homegrown software tapped into. We began trying to look at the data to draw insights, and most of it was wrong. There was zero ability to go back and figure out, where those costs actually had been accrued, in terms of the cost codes and job cost accounting. And so that was the big kind of light bulb epiphany moment that, would ultimately lead to me co-founding
Yeah.
Rumbix about 9-10 months later after that.
Wow, I mean, that's awesome. We're about to tap into that. But going, I guess, one step back to that first year, right, of transition, or really that first year of business school, which I guess is like a year and a half, more or less. What kind of advice would you now give to your younger self to have been able, to have gone through that process a little bit easier, simpler, whatever, word kind of resonates with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have been, just don't be so hard on yourself, and you know, hindsight's 2020.
Hmm. Yeah.
At the time, I thought I was the one that got admitted accidentally, but as the years went on, and I had that conversation with lots of good friends, and almost everyone there felt some degree of imposter syndrome, and I think throughout my life, I've questioned myself a
Hmm.
lot, but in hindsight, my gut was always right, and I think it's just um, get advice for others, but like it's okay to trust your gut and know
Hmm.
that is the right decision for you or the right path, and it's something that I had kind of questioned, and then my gut ended up being right enough times. I was able to pattern match and just say I need to
Yeah.
start trusting my gut when I have conviction around something. But certainly at 27 years old, I hadn't yet developed that muscle, and I think that would just be I would say, hey, that's a muscle that you can develop, and one of the most important ones, which is good judgment and how do you learn to trust your gut when there's lots of information and you need to make a decision. And so, yeah, I would just tell myself to trust my gut more and, um, you know, uh, follow my convictions.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's all great advice, valuable to, I mean, really anyone in any situation. I'll say particularly so for any veteran in that transition period. And that transition period isn't necessarily, the specific time frame that I kind of, mentioned. Rather, for a lot of people, I know for myself included, it can take a long period of time. It can come and go in terms of you feeling more pressure of that kind of the fish out of the water, as you put it. I think that's a great saying, very relevant. So yeah, just be less hard on yourself when you can recognize that these transitions take time. You're going from one extreme to the other, military to civilian. So great advice, man. Thank you for sharing that.
And I think like I always felt like I was behind everyone else because I went and did 5 years of military service. But one thing that I found out was like a lot of people were like, man, I thought about the military and wish I would have served, but really never had the cojones to do it. And,
Yeah.
you know, another bit of advice is like, don't try to compare yourself because, yeah, you did,
Mm-hmm.
not go work in like financial consulting for 5 years. So certainly I had to learn things at business school and beyond that, people I went to undergrad with had already learned. And the temptation is to think you're behind, but the reality is that you're actually ahead in a lot of different respects. And being able
Yeah.
to see your military service really as a unique differentiator for yourself and something that a lot of the population doesn't have the balls to do.
100% agreed. And you're touching a lot on really kind of the other core of the show, right? Is to talk about these translatable skills. I know you actually did mention a bunch of them already. I want to get into what you're doing right now, and then I'll touch on, then I'll ask you to highlight, specific translatable skills similar to what you already did, but to just plug it in particular. All right. So talk to us about this aha moment where this is where you left off in your story, right? So you're working on this mega project, realizing necessity for. Go ahead.
Yeah, and we didn't have real time data. The data was latent and inaccurate, and so actually got exposed to a platform called Blue Force Tracker when I was in Djibouti. Blue forces are your friendly forces. This was a very very um, what now would look like antiquated technology, but Panasonic Toughbook computers, the Humvees downrange, all had connectivity and GPS signals. So you were able to get very rudimentary picture of like what's going on at the front lines from the field. And so it
Mm-hmm.
was really this like, how do you access data from the front lines to create real time visibility? When I was in that joint operations center, you could see, like I said, updates on 75 different, potential engagements all throughout the continent of Africa, what's going on, real time data, versus I'm sitting at this copper mine. At this point, it was 2013, so about 2 years later, and I'm looking through a 70-page spreadsheet printout trying to figure out what's been going on for the last 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
all I have is like, well, I just know we're losing a lot of money in all these areas, but I can't tell
Yeah.
you why or how or what we need to do to get back on track. So the original idea was to try to passively detect and pull data from sensors on workers. So came back to Stanford, basically said, hey, I think there's a there. I'm going to work on this startup idea. And so the original idea, which we ultimately launched out of Stanford, was phones taking GPS location plus wrist-mounted wearable sensors to try to detect construction work activities in the same way that your Fitbit will be able to tell you, are you walking, running, swimming, biking.
Mm-hmm.
So the original idea for Rumbix, was very much inspired by military technology and the ability to kind of get data in real time from the front lines to help inform project execution. And the pain point was, on this project that ultimately went about $1 billion over budget because we didn't have good real time data to be able to manage the project. And so that was, kind of the light bulb epiphany moment. Came back to Stanford. I was supposed to only have one more quarter for my dual degree program. I dialed down my course load. Thankfully, to the GI Bill, I was able to pay for housing and take a minimum course load and essentially work on Rumbix for a full year on the side while I was at Stanford. working on the original business idea, working on the original technology. This was like pre-Apple Watch.
Yeah.
Fitbits parsed all the data on device, so we were using Samsung Gear Live watches like Gen 1 on construction workers on Stanford's campus. And so yeah, I was able to have the space to kind of incubate that idea. The last class I took at Stanford was entrepreneurship and civil and environmental engineering. Instead of a final exam, um, there's a pitch to VCs, like actual VCs, and they're like, "This is a very financeable seed stage opportunity." And in 7 years of college and undergrad, that's the only A+ in any class I've ever gotten. So I think that
That's
was kind
awesome.
of the validation I needed. And 2 weeks later, two of the four professors were our first checks into the business as investors, and it's kind of off to the
Wow.
races from there.
That's awesome, man. So, touch on what the company's doing now, because you mentioned there's the initial idea concept versus now.
Yep. Yeah, and the initial idea is still a good one. I see folks still working on it. I think
Yeah,
there's a social stigma around connecting wearables to workers that
correct.
the industry struggles with. But we worked on that idea for about a better part of 2.5 years, and pivoted into just providing a software solution.
Hmm.
The job site connectivity was still tough. We were deploying local area networks on project sites. There
Yeah,
wasn't widespread Wi-Fi. There wasn't cellular connectivity in a lot of these project sites. And we continually heard from customers, "Hey, if you can just get rid of all the paper and Excel, I'd buy that solution from you today." And so, really looked at you know what we call worker level field data and a system of record for that. And so, there's a lot of systems that track workflows related to as built, stuff like Procore, Jet.Build, the
hmm,
Autodesk build. But we really said, hey, there's not a place to really understand who did what, how productive were they, where are their
hmm,
licenses, certifications, all of your manpower management. And so really pivoted into that, seeing an opportunity for that. We'd always been going after labor productivity and wanted to do it passively, and just said, hey, actively, instead of passively detecting that, what if we just build a user interface that's super simple enough for the foreman and the people in the field to actually just
yeah,
self-report, and then the tools for the field engineers and the PM to do true up. And so that's really where we pivoted into. So today, we work with hundreds of companies all throughout the US, Canada, UAE, and New Zealand. And many of the top builders, both on the trade contractor and the general contractor side of the house. And really provide a full stop field operations suite that takes care of timekeeping, production tracking, daily reports, T&M tracking for both unit rate work, but also non-base scope work. Um, and then like a full analytics suite to really help companies actually go from the first step is digitizing, but the second like bigger step is how do I
yeah.
get insights out of that data, and how
Right.
do I do it with a quick enough feedback loop that I can really kind of make small decisions every day that lead to very big gains and outcomes over time.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing. So, I mean, in reality, it's the same core concept. You just created it in a way where it was like undeniably useful or undeniably could be used on any job site. So that's awesome.
Yep. Yeah. No. I mean, it solved the pain point that I wish I had up at Minera Escondida up in
Yeah.
Chile, and but it was a pain point that exists at your small electrical contractor all the way up to like our biggest customers
Hmm.
have 3, 4, 5,000 people using the system each week. And yeah, it's just at the end of the day, I love the construction industry, and really saw my opportunity to kind of create a mark on the industry was through technology, and helping push the industry into the 21st century by bringing in good technology. I remember my first project at Barracks. There was a product called WebCM in 2006, which was cloud-based construction project management software. So it existed in 2006, but I
Yeah.
will tell you, the internet speeds were too slow to upload a single photo, so we just abandoned it on the project. And that was my first experience with construction software. I started out, as a project manager. I was the tech, the young tech millennial, and so I was the one that was like scanning things in the PDF that I was getting hard copy delivered, putting them into file folders, and doing all that stuff, on the Navy servers. and living the pain point of not having,
Mhm.
better software. And so I always, felt very passionate about, construction has just been overlooked by good software. There hasn't been a lot of good software. I used PlanGrid as an example of the first software anyone liked using in
Mhm.
construction. Before you just kind of begrudgingly used it because, computer aided drafting was better than, literally physical
Mhm.
drafting with pencil and paper. And, yeah, saw and had lived firsthand kind of the lack of good software. And by the time I was graduating business school in 2014, it was like, okay, actually the cloud exists. There's mobile devices in the pockets of a lot of folks. Like there's an opportunity to actually bring um, enterprise grade software to end users in the field that looks and feels like the modern consumer applications that they use in their everyday life, which was a huge need and pain point. The opportunity that we saw.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations on that journey and the success that you have. It's really amazing to hear it. So let's hit some translatable skills, military to profession. Granted, this is probably the most one-to-one anyone will hear. Nonetheless, still important to highlight.
Yeah, no, I mean, very, very fortunate that my work in the military was directly translatable to
Hmm.
private sector. But I will say, military experience is extremely translatable to early stage startups, and that's something I don't think you hear a lot of people talk about. The military, you've got troops that are underpaid, overworked. You've got a highly dynamic environment that can change frequently. You're typically given a scarcity of resources that you need to execute the mission. And so it teaches you to really learn how to do things like build intrinsic motivation. Like, how can I
Hmm.
create a vision, an end state where people are wanting to go that extra mile because of the intrinsic reward that they get from it. Also, the ability to just like, this is plan A, we're going on that. Like, that plan's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. You need to come up with plans B, C, and D. Like, the military, you're always thinking about kind of what are those
Hmm.
backup plans. So it's very easy to kind of have a fallback position because like, hey, in the event shit hits the fan, I've got to have these three other, potential courses of action. So um, the military instills in you a good kind of ability to be constantly planning and evaluating and having backup. Um, Courses of action if you need to take them, which happens all the time in
Hmm.
startup life. Um, I think the military service also creates a mission driven and service driven veteran. Look, like startups die for two reasons: you quit or you run out of money, right? And so I think with a lot of veterans, that mission driven nature, I'm not going to quit till I take the hill. That kind of ethos really helps you push through hard times that maybe a non-veteran would have quit.
Hmm.
So I think it gives you a lot of ability to embrace the suck and just kind of get through, difficult times because you've done that in your military service. And yeah, command presence is the other one. I was 22 years old and was standing in front of my Seabees, my troops. As an ensign, I was their officer. I was in charge of them, and the chief was old enough to be my dad. And I had to sit there and kind of act like I knew what I was doing and build this command
Hmm.
presence that instilled the confidence in others that I was listening to them and I had their best interests at heart and would take care of them. And I think 10 years later, I found myself doing the same thing in front of a bunch of software engineers. I know nothing about software engineering, and other than a couple of courses in high school and freshman year of college, I did a little bit of C++ development, but I had to be an expert on something I knew nothing about, and so
Hmm.
I think the military. Definitely, my experience in the military positioned me well to kind of um, it wasn't always the right direction, but lead the troops in the direction they needed to go. So we figured out it wasn't the right direction. Course correct a little bit. Let's set off on this new
Hmm.
path and kind of head that way. And until we bump into the next barrier. And, this kind of concept of the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, and then start it again. All right. Observe, orient, decide, act. And so I think, the military and especially being on deployment when things are just, constantly dynamic and changing is an unbelievable training ground. for an early stage entrepreneur in terms of the quality skills and level headedness that you need in what otherwise can be a very chaotic environment.
Very, very well said, man. I appreciate you also giving, I mean, really all principles, right, that are applicable in any kind of a transition, right? Military principles to civilian life slash profession in civilian life. So very well said. And I also like that you had that call out to specifically startups. Agreed, not something that gets talked about very much, but very relatable and certainly invaluable experience military bringing that into that startup ecosystem. So awesome, well said, man. So before we close out the professional side, I want to give you a plug right now to give us any career wins that you want to just mention.
Yeah, no, I mean, very thankful to have just been given a lot of opportunities of support and help from others that came before me. So, like
Hmm.
the first board director I had, was Charles Holloway. He was the first guy I told about the Rumbix idea. He was my formation of new ventures professor. He was Admiral Rickover's aide, putting the first nuclear power plants on submarines back in the
Wow.
50s. And so, just I've had career wins along the way, but what I love doing the most is really kind of helping other veterans and paying it forward. Very proud of the fact that Rumbix was an idea in my head, and we've been deployed on almost a million job sites now all around the
Wow.
world, and hundreds of thousands of people have used the software. And Turner, DPR, Hensel Phelps, three of the top 10 builders in the US uses every day for all their self-perform. And so, lots of stuff that you can put on a resume, but, the big career wins are, you know, um, two of our first software developers that, took a chance on Rumbix in the very early days and, worked with us 4 and 5 years and then went on to, these were guys that, grew up in Pittsburgh and, one was still working there, and Silicon Valley was a very foreign place to them, and one went on to Meta, one went on to Airbnb, and
Nice.
similarly, our first product manager, Steve Chu, was a former Marine Corps comms officer, and he's at Box now, and
Nice.
it's just been really great in the position I'm in, having had the opportunity to really be a part of a lot of other people's professional journeys and supporting them on those journeys, and and now doing as much kind of advising and helping as I can for the next generation of veterans that are, where I was, 11 years ago,
Yeah.
feeling
Yeah.
like a fish out of water, trying to figure it out.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely, man. Yeah. Well said. Thank you. All right. Last but not least, final two questions.
Yep.
What is your wellness practice? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole other hour and a half
Yeah, I'm
on
sure. Yeah, man.
this. Yeah, this is something that's near and dear to my heart.
Mm,
So, I mean, it starts with like the three major building blocks are just like eat right, sleep right, and exercise. And
mhm,
so, um, trying to eat as much, natural food as possible, no added sugar, anything like that, a low inflammatory diet. At night, shutting off devices kind of 45 minutes before I want to go to bed,
mhm.
getting into like a nighttime routine, measuring my sleep, tracking it, adjusting things, not drinking coffee after 2 p.m., making sure I'm getting quality sleep, make sure you're getting in, 2 to 3 workouts per week. Try to meditate every day for 10 minutes. That doesn't always happen, but it's good grounding practice.
Mhm.
At the end of showers, I'll turn it all the way down to cold and sit in the
Yep.
shower for 2 minutes. Good way to kind of, not need that first cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
And yeah, again, like I could go all into kind of supplements and routines and everything like that. But I think, eating well, sleeping well, and not forgetting to exercise really kind of unlocks, the basics for, being able to just bring the energy that you need, especially to start up life, and not burn out. I'm 10 and
Mhm.
a half years into it now. And the bad news for you is it doesn't get easier.
Yeah.
It's a good
I
way.
know that, man.
If you take care of yourself and do the things you need to do in your life, you'll be able to find the energy to keep going. And I think it's a big part of success equation.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Critical 3 core elements. Even if you're hitting only one of those, 2 of those, it's still really valuable to anyone's day to day. So well said, man. Last but not least, a favorite book or books that you'd like to recommend?
Yeah, I'm re-listening to The Hard Thing About Hard Things right
Mm.
now, which is Ben Horowitz's book about Opsware and Loud Cloud. I'm re-listening to it because we recently got a new investor who actually was at Opsware and Loud Cloud with Ben Horowitz and was also at Epiphany with Steve Blank. So I wanted to refresh myself on it. But if you haven't read that book and you're working at a startup or running a startup, I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
It just puts everything in perspective in terms of the roller coaster ride that Ben Horowitz was on at Loud Cloud and Opsware. And lots of very good tactical advice for leaders as well. But the biggest thing is just, I mean, you know, they IPO'd like super early in the middle of the .com bust and then sold the core business to like spin out an internal software business. And you just like, when things are going bad or crazy, like that's a good way of just being like, what ain't that bad?
Yeah, it ain't that bad. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a great book recommendation. I'm due for a reread as well. I also do audio, so yeah, I'm gonna give it another listen. Great recommendation. All right, man. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, really appreciate you sharing your story. Lots of amazing insights, lots of amazing experiences. I am eagerly waiting for you to hit that 1 million mark. I am sure I'm going to see that on social. I'll celebrate that for you from afar. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, we're at like 890,000 projects now, so hopefully it should be here in the next few months or so. And
It's happening.
thanks for having me on. Appreciate what you're doing, drawing attention to veterans who build in the built world.
Absolutely, man. To our listeners and our subscribers, thank you for listening. Reminder to please subscribe to our channels, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple. Shout out to our sponsor, Jet.Build, and see y'all soon. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.